When a movie flops, the studio usually absorbs it, regroups, and keeps going. That's just how Hollywood math works. 10 movies out, a few bombs, a couple of hits, and you survive. But not always. Some movies are so catastrophically expensive, so wildly out of touch with what audiences wanted, that they don't just damage a studio, they end it. Bankruptcy filings, fire sales, entire divisions shuttered overnight. These are not stories about films that missed projections or underperformed against expectations. These are case studies in what happens when ego, overconfidence, and genuinely terrible financial decisions collide in the most expensive industry on earth. By 1982, Francis Ford Coppola had already made The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, which meant he was, by any reasonable measure, completely untouchable in Hollywood. And that's arguably what got him into trouble. For his next project, Coppola decided he didn't want to shoot in Las Vegas. He wanted to build Las Vegas on a soundstage, and his studio Zoetrope constructed a full-scale replica of the Vegas Strip, including neon signs, a fake airport, and several city blocks worth of set pieces. The budget climbed to around $27 million, which in 1982 was an enormous sum for what was, at its core, a small romantic musical. The problem wasn't just the spending, though. Coppola had become obsessed with shooting through video monitors in real time, and the story itself got buried so completely under the technical experimentation that audiences simply had no interest in what ended up on screen. The box office came in around $638,000, and Zoetrope Studios, which Coppola had funded personally and through debt, collapsed under the losses. Years of creditor repayments followed, and his production facility eventually had to be sold. Even the most celebrated directors alive are not immune to the idea that technical ambition can replace a story people actually want to watch. Hollywood was still riding the epic wave in 1964, with Ben-Hur having cleaned up at the Oscars just a few years prior, and Spartacus performing well enough to make ancient Rome feel like reliable box office territory. Producer Samuel Bronston decided to go bigger than anyone had attempted before, and what his team built for The Fall of the Roman Empire was reportedly the largest single film set ever constructed at that point, a full-scale recreation of the Roman Forum spread across roughly 55 acres in Spain, with nearly 8,000 extras filling out the battle sequences. The budget reached $19 million, and the film earned back roughly 25 cents of every dollar spent. Bronston's production company went bankrupt, and the consequences spread further than that. The failure here, alongside the concurrent disaster of Cleopatra, essentially wiped the sword and sandal epic off Hollywood's slate for close to 2 decades. Studios looked at those numbers and decided ancient Rome simply wasn't worth the risk anymore, and that genre dormancy lasted until the late 1990s. One film can kill an entire category of filmmaking. That's how much weight a single box office catastrophe can carry. If there's one story that gets cited every time someone wants to explain what happens when a director receives unlimited power without any guardrails, it's this one. Michael Cimino had just won Best Picture for The Deer Hunter, and United Artists, flush with that success, handed him near total creative control over his next project. The original budget sat around $11 million, and what actually got spent landed at approximately $44 million. Cimino shot 220 hours of footage. He demanded reshoots of scenes because clouds weren't positioned to his liking, and by one account, he replaced an entire school bus crew with authentic period costumed extras for a shot that lasted seconds on screen. The final cut ran 3 hours and 39 minutes, and when it opened in 1980, both critics and audiences were alienated by what they found. The film grossed about $3.5 million. United Artists, one of the most historically significant studios in Hollywood, founded by Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, and Douglas Fairbanks, was sold off to MGM in the aftermath, ending its run as an independent institution. One director, one film, $44 million, and an entire studio's history erased. This one lands differently because the movie itself is genuinely good. The Right Stuff came out in 1983, followed the Mercury 7 astronauts alongside test pilot Chuck Yeager, and walked away with 4 Academy Awards. Critics loved it, and in a just world, it would have been a substantial commercial hit. The film ran over 3 hours and moved at a deliberately meditative pace, aimed squarely at audiences willing to sit with something serious and unhurried, which is a small audience when you've spent $27 million and need a blockbuster return. Revenue fell significantly short of the production budget. The Ladd Company, the independent studio behind it, shut down shortly after the numbers came in. No fraud, no ego spiral, no reckless overspending on unnecessary sets, just a genuinely ambitious film that found its audience far too late to save the people who made it. Sometimes there's no villain in these stories, and the math is simply the math. Carolco Pictures had a strong track record heading into 1995, with Terminator 2, Total Recall, and Basic Instinct all on their production record. None of that history could protect them from what happened next. The studio was reportedly already in financial trouble when they greenlit Cutthroat Island, a pirate action film starring Gina Davis and directed by Rennie Harlin, and production was notoriously chaotic from the start. The budget reached approximately $98 million, and throughout the shoot, the studio's cash position kept deteriorating. When the film opened, it brought in roughly $10 million worldwide, and Carolco filed for bankruptcy almost immediately after. The failure was so complete and so public that Hollywood largely walked away from the pirate genre for years, until Pirates of the Caribbean arrived in 2003 and studios were finally willing to try again. What makes Carolco's collapse worth examining is that it wasn't caused by a single reckless call. It came from a series of them, and Cutthroat Island was simply the last one the company couldn't survive. John Travolta spent years trying to get Battlefield Earth made. Based on a novel by Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard, the project carried deep personal significance for Travolta, who was a prominent member of the church and heavily involved in getting the film to screen. When it finally came out in 2000, through a company called Franchise Pictures, the critical reception was immediate and brutal. It ended up winning multiple Razzie Awards and sits on most lists of the worst major studio releases ever produced. The film lost an estimated $44 million, but the financial fallout didn't stop there. A lawsuit followed, with a jury ultimately finding that Franchise Pictures had fraudulently inflated its production costs, and the studio essentially ceased to function in the legal aftermath. Battlefield Earth stands as a case where the production, the release, and the aftermath each qualified as their own separate disaster. Fox Animation Studios released Titan A.E. in 2000, a science fiction animated film with a strong voice cast, Matt Damon, Drew Barrymore, Bill Pullman, and a genuinely interesting premise built around humanity surviving after Earth gets destroyed. The film cost somewhere around $75 million to produce, and the problems reportedly started before anyone in the public had seen a single frame. Fox Animation had apparently lost confidence in the film during production, pulling back on marketing support at exactly the moment the film needed it most, and for a $75 million animated release, that kind of institutional hesitation is severe. The final box office landed around $36 million. Within weeks of the release, Fox shut down its entire animation division, closing a studio that had produced animated films for years. The argument worth making here is that the marketing failure carries as much responsibility as anything that happened creatively. When a studio stops believing in its own film and pulls back on support, the outcome becomes nearly predetermined before audiences ever get to decide for themselves. Square Pictures was the film division of the company behind the Final Fantasy video game franchise, and in 2001, they released what they believed would be a landmark moment in cinema. A fully computer-generated film built around photorealistic digital humans. The technical achievement was real. 4 years of production and a budget reportedly reaching $137 million produced character models that were genuinely striking for the time. The film made approximately $85 million worldwide. Square Pictures shut down not long after, and the parent company took a financial hit significant enough to contribute to a merger with Enix the following year. None of this happened because the technology failed. It worked exactly as intended. Audiences simply didn't connect with the story, and a $137 million wager on animation technology without a story people cared about is a position very few companies could recover from. The lesson about technical innovation substituting for emotional investment has been relearned several times since. This one sits slightly apart from the rest because the film itself wasn't a disaster by most standard measures. The Golden Compass came out in 2007, drew from Philip Pullman's beloved novel, carried a strong cast, and grossed approximately $372 million worldwide. By surface-level accounting, that sounds like a success. The deal structure told a different story. To finance the production, New Line Cinema had reportedly sold off international distribution rights in a way that left the studio seeing very little of that $372 million come back to them, and domestic numbers fell short of what a $180 million budget required. New Line Cinema was folded into Warner Brothers in 2008, ending its run as an independent label. The money was structured out of reach before the film ever opened, which means a studio can watch a moderately performing film hit screens, see hundreds of millions of dollars come in globally, and still end up unable to survive. That's a specific kind of financial failure that has nothing to do with the quality of what was made. Disney shut down Image Movers Digital, the performance capture animation studio they had backed, shortly after Mars Needs Moms opened in 2011. The production budget sat at $150 million, and the worldwide gross came in around $39 million. Much of the criticism centered on the animation style, which pushed into what's sometimes called the uncanny valley, the effect where digital human characters look close enough to real people to create discomfort, but not convincingly enough to feel genuine. The characters reportedly unsettled audiences, and for a family film, that audience reaction is close to fatal. Disney had actually seen this warning arrive before. Earlier, Robert Zemeckis' performance capture films like The Polar Express had drawn nearly identical feedback, and yet the studio moved forward anyway. Image Movers Digital was shuttered once the numbers confirmed what the warning signs had already suggested. Sometimes the signals are visible well in advance, and the decision to proceed gets made regardless. Not every story in this list moves in the same direction, and this last one earns its place because of where it eventually landed. It's a Wonderful Life came out in 1946, directed by Frank Capra, and it didn't perform at the box office. Liberty Films, the studio behind it, had bet heavily on the production and couldn't sustain the losses, forcing Capra and his producing partner to sell the company to Paramount. Liberty Films ceased to exist. For decades, the film sat as a disappointment. Then, a copyright oversight in the 1970s allowed the film to enter the public domain, which meant any television station could broadcast it at no cost, and they did, constantly, every December for years. A generation of Americans grew up watching it at Christmas, and it eventually became arguably the most beloved holiday film ever made. Liberty Films had been gone for decades by the time any of that happened. Capra himself reportedly carried complicated feelings about a legacy built on a film that had cost him his studio. That's the version of this story with no clear villain and no clean lesson, a masterpiece that arrived too late to save the people who made it, recognized as a classic only after they were no longer around to benefit from it. And that pattern, where a film earns money or earns acclaim or earns both, and the studio still ends up gone, comes down almost entirely to the financial architecture behind the release. How the budget was structured, how distribution rights were sold, how marketing costs were accounted for, and where the actual break-even point sat. Most audiences never see any of that, which is part of why these collapses feel so confusing from the outside. If you want to understand how that side of it actually works, I put together a guide called Behind the Gross. It covers how studios calculate real break-even points, how marketing budgets function in practice, and why some films walk away from massive worldwide grosses with nothing to show for it. You'll find the link in the description below, or if you're watching on TV, type boxbus.art into your browser or scan the QR code on screen now. What connects all of these cases when you look at them together is how many different paths lead to the same outcome. Unchecked creative control destroyed United Artists. A bad rights deal finished New Line. Misplaced faith in technology ended Square Pictures. A series of bad bets brought down Coralco. The through line isn't incompetence. Some of these people were extraordinarily talented. The through line is what happens when a studio ties its entire survival to a single wager, and the wager doesn't pay off. Hollywood still operates this way. The names change, the franchises change, the technology changes, and the underlying logic stays the same. Which of these surprised you most? Drop it in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious which story you hadn't come across before. And if you want more of this kind of business side Hollywood breakdown, subscribing means you won't miss the next one.